Silas Ward had been digging for 3 hours when his shovel struck something that made him freeze in absolute terror. The metallic clang echoed across his empty ranch, but it wasn't the sound that stopped his heart. It was what he saw when he cleared away the dirt. The sun blazed overhead as Silas wiped sweat from his weathered face, squinting at the hole he'd been digging near the old oak tree. He'd been trying to fix a broken fence post. Nothing more. Just another day of back-breaking work on his isolated ranch outside Tombstone. The nearest neighbor, Ezekiel Marsh, lived 5 miles east, and the town was a hard ride through desert terrain that could kill a man if he wasn't careful. Silas had bought this land cheap 3 years ago, and now he understood why. The previous owner had left in a hurry, selling for half what the property was worth. Local folks whispered about bad luck, but Silas needed the space and didn't believe in superstitions. He believed in hard work, sweat, and making an honest living raising cattle. But as he stared into that hole, his hands trembling on the shovel handle, Silas realized some things were buried for good reason. The wooden crate was about the size of a coffin, but smaller. Old, weathered planks held together with rusted iron bands. Part of the lid had rotted away, revealing contents that made Silas's stomach lurch. He could see fabric, expensive fabric, and something that glinted like metal in the harsh afternoon light. His first instinct was to cover it back up, pretend he'd never seen it. But curiosity ate at him like acid. Who buries a crate this deep? And why here, under the oak tree that stood like a sentinel on his property? Silas glanced around his empty ranch. No one could see him from the main road. No riders approached from any direction. Just him, the buzzing flies, and whatever lay rotting in that wooden box. He knelt beside the hole, his knees grinding against the rocky soil. The smell hit him then. Not death, but something else. Something metallic and cold. As he reached toward the crate, his hand stopped inches away. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, saddle his horse, and ride to town. Instead, he grabbed the corner of the rotted lid and pulled. The wood came apart in his hands, crumbling like dried leaves. What he saw inside made him stumble backward, his boots slipping on the loose dirt. His heart hammered against his ribs as he stared at contents that could only mean one thing. Someone had committed a terrible crime on his land, and now Silas Ward held the evidence. But as he knelt there in the blazing heat, studying what lay buried beneath his property, Silas had no idea that someone had been watching him dig. Someone who knew exactly what he'd found and would kill to keep it buried. Silas forced himself to look again, fighting every instinct that told him to run. Inside the rotted crate lay a woman's dress, once fine silk, now stained and torn. But it wasn't the dress that made his blood run cold. It was what lay beneath it. A leather satchel, still intact after years underground. And scattered around it, glinting in the sunlight, were gold coins. More gold than Silas had ever seen in his life. But gold didn't explain the dark stains on that dress, or why someone had buried it 6 feet deep under an oak tree. He reached for the satchel with shaking hands. The leather was soft. Expensive. Inside he found papers, documents with official seals and signatures, a property deed for land in California, a marriage certificate, and at the bottom, a letter written in a woman's delicate handwriting. "If anyone finds this," the letter began, "know that Marcus Dalton killed me for the gold he thought I carried. I hid it where he'll never find it. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I pray someone will see justice done." Silas read the letter 3 times, his mind racing. Eleanor Whitmore. He'd heard that name before, whispered in saloons and around campfires. A wealthy widow who'd disappeared 5 years ago while traveling to California. Everyone assumed she'd been killed by bandits somewhere in the desert, but she'd made it this far, made it to his land, where someone named Marcus Dalton had caught up with her. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Silas's head snap up. In the distance, a rider was coming fast across the desert, kicking up a cloud of dust. Silas quickly stuffed the letter into his shirt pocket and grabbed the satchel. The gold coins scattered as he tried to gather them, some falling back into the hole. The rider was getting closer. Too close. Silas threw dirt over the crate, working frantically to cover the evidence. His hands shook as he packed the soil down, trying to make it look undisturbed. The fence post lay forgotten beside the hole as he focused on hiding what he'd found. But he was too late. The rider reined in his horse 20 yards away, and Silas recognized the man immediately. Marcus Dalton himself. Older now, but still carrying the same cold eyes that had made him feared throughout the territory. Silas had seen him in town, always alone, always watching. "Afternoon, Ward," Dalton called out, his voice casual but his eyes fixed on the freshly disturbed dirt. "Doing some digging, I see." Silas straightened, the satchel hidden behind his back. "Just fixing a fence post. Nothing interesting." Dalton dismounted and walked closer, his boots crunching on the dry earth. "Funny thing about this old oak tree. Previous owner used to say it brought bad luck. Said things buried beneath it had a way of coming back to haunt folks." The air between them crackled with tension. Silas could feel Eleanor's letter pressing against his chest, and the satchel felt like it weighed 100 pounds in his hands. "I wouldn't know about that," Silas said carefully. Dalton smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "No, I suppose you wouldn't. Yet." Dalton circled the oak tree like a predator, his spurs jangling with each step. Silas remained perfectly still, the satchel pressed against his back, feeling sweat drip down his spine despite the desert heat. "You know, Ward, I've been thinking about this old place," Dalton said, running his fingers along the oak's bark. "Been wondering what secrets it might hold. Previous owner, old Pete Morrison, he used to babble about buried treasure before he took off for California." Silas's throat felt like sandpaper. Pete was a drunk. Everyone knew that. Maybe so. Dalton's eyes never left the disturbed earth. But drunks sometimes tell the truth, especially when they're scared. He knelt down and picked up a handful of the loose soil Silas had hastily scattered. "This dirt's been moved recently. Real recently." The leather satchel seemed to burn against Silas's back. Inside his pocket, Eleanor's letter crinkled as he shifted his weight. He thought about the words she'd written, how this man had killed her for gold he thought she carried, gold that was now scattered in the hole behind him. "I told you I was fixing the fence post," Silas said, nodding toward the wooden post lying nearby. Dalton stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Funny thing about fence posts, Ward. You usually dig the hole first, then set the post. But this hole here?" He gestured at the disturbed ground. "This hole's been filled in." A bead of sweat ran down Silas's temple. Dalton was too close to the truth and they both knew it. The man had been searching for Eleanor's treasure for 5 years, and now he stood 3 feet away from it. "I changed my mind about where to put it," Silas said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Is that so?" Dalton smiled that cold smile again. "Mind if I take a look around? Make sure you didn't miss anything interesting while you were digging?" Before Silas could answer, the sound of an approaching wagon echoed across the desert. Both men turned to see a cloud of dust rising from the main road. As it drew closer, Silas recognized his neighbor Ezekiel Marsh driving his supply wagon back from town. Dalton's expression darkened. "Looks like you've got company coming." Silas felt a surge of relief. Ezekiel was a good man, reliable, and he carried a rifle in his wagon. With a witness present, Dalton couldn't do anything too bold. "Ezekiel always stops by on his way back from town," Silas said, finding his confidence again. But Dalton's next words froze that confidence solid. "That's unfortunate, Ward, because now I'm going to have to kill both of you." The wagon was still half a mile away, too far for Ezekiel to hear a gunshot, too far to see what was happening by the oak tree. Dalton's hand moved toward the pistol on his hip with practiced ease. Silas realized he had seconds to act, and whatever he did next would determine whether he lived to see another sunset. Silas dove sideways just as Dalton's pistol cleared leather. The shot cracked across the desert, echoing off the distant hills. Silas hit the ground hard, the satchel spilling from his hands and sliding across the dirt. Dalton cursed and took aim again, but Silas rolled behind the oak tree's massive trunk. The second bullet splintered bark inches from his head. Through the dust and gun smoke, he could see Ezekiel's wagon lurching to a stop on the road, the old man reaching for his rifle. "Ezekiel, stay back!" Silas shouted. "Get to town, get the sheriff." But his neighbor was already climbing down from the wagon, rifle in hand. "What in blazes is going on here?" Dalton pivoted toward the new threat, giving Silas the chance he needed. He lunged for the satchel, snatching it up along with a handful of the scattered gold coins. As Dalton fired at Ezekiel, Silas sprinted toward his ranch house, zigzagging to avoid the bullets that kicked up dirt around his boots. Behind him, he heard Ezekiel's rifle boom in response. The old man might be past 60, but he'd fought in 3 Indian wars and could still shoot straighter than most men half his age. Silas burst through his front door, gasping for breath. His hands shook as he loaded his shotgun, checking the shells twice. Through the window, he could see Dalton taking cover behind his horse, while Ezekiel advanced steadily from the wagon, working the lever on his rifle with mechanical precision. The satchel lay on his kitchen table, Eleanor's letter still crumpled in his pocket, evidence of a 5-year-old murder, and enough gold to make a man rich, or dead. A bullet shattered his window, sending glass across the floor. Dalton had circled around, using the chaos of the gunfight to get closer to the house. Silas could hear his boots on the wooden porch, creaking as he approached the front door. "Ward!" Dalton called out. "I know what you found. That gold belonged to Eleanor Whitmore, and she's been dead for 5 years. Give me what's mine, and maybe I'll let you live." Silas pressed his back against the wall beside the door. Shotgun ready. "That gold never belonged to you, Dalton. You killed her for it, but she hid it where you couldn't find it." "Smart woman," Dalton said, his voice closer now. "Too bad smart women don't live long in this territory." The door exploded inward, torn off its hinges by a powerful kick. Dalton charged through, pistol raised, but Silas was ready. The shotgun boomed, filling the small room with thunder and smoke. When the smoke cleared, Dalton lay sprawled on the floor, clutching his shoulder and groaning. Blood seeped between his fingers, but he was very much alive, and very angry. "This ain't over, Ward," he gasped, his eyes burning with rage. "I got friends. They'll come looking." That's when Silas heard something that made his blood turn to ice. The sound of multiple horses approaching fast, their hoofbeats drumming against the hard desert ground like thunder. If this story is touching you in any way, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with someone who loves a good Western tale, and subscribe to the Western Redemption channel. Every single day at exactly 1 p.m., a brand new story drops, packed with emotion, justice, and redemption. So turn on the notification bell and don't miss the next chapter, because out here in the West, no one waits around. 3 riders thundered into Silas's yard, their horses lathered with sweat and dust. Silas recognized them immediately. Dalton's crew. Jake Brennan, a scarred gunfighter who'd killed 6 men in fair fights. Tom Hartley, a former soldier turned outlaw. And worst of all, Cole Vickery, a man so vicious that even other criminals avoided him. Ezekiel was pinned down behind the water trough, his rifle empty and no time to reload. The 3 newcomers had him surrounded, their guns trained on his position. "Drop the rifle, old man," Brennan shouted. "This ain't your fight." From inside the house, Silas could see Dalton struggling to his feet, blood soaking his shirt but determination burning in his eyes. The wounded man stumbled to the broken doorway and called out to his men. "Ward's got Eleanor's treasure," Dalton yelled. "Everything we've been looking for 5 years. It's in that house." Silas grabbed the satchel and backed toward the rear of the house. Through the window he could see his horse in the corral, saddled and ready. If he could reach it, he might have a chance to escape into the desert hills where he knew every canyon and creek. But that meant leaving Ezekiel to die. The old man had already done more than enough, risking his life for a neighbor he barely knew. Silas owed him nothing more than occasional help during harvest season. The smart thing would be to run, take the evidence to the sheriff in Tombstone, and let the law handle it. Vickery's voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. "Brennan, you and Hartley go around back. I'll keep the old buzzard pinned down here." Footsteps pounded around the sides of the house. They were surrounding him, cutting off his escape routes one by one. In minutes, they'd have him trapped with nowhere to run. Silas looked at Eleanor's letter, still clutched in his hand. Her words echoed in his mind. "I pray someone will see justice done." 5 years she'd been waiting for someone to find her evidence, to make Marcus Dalton pay for what he'd done. He couldn't run. Not now. Silas checked his shotgun. 1 shell left. He had a rifle in the bedroom, but that meant crossing the main room where Dalton waited. The wounded man might be hurt, but he was still deadly with a pistol. A window shattered in the back bedroom. Brennan was already inside the house. "Found him," Brennan called out. "He's cornered." But Silas Ward had spent 3 years working this ranch, learning every inch of it. He knew something Brennan didn't. The loose floorboard in the bedroom that led to the root cellar. A way out that nobody else knew existed. As Brennan's boots creaked across the bedroom floor, Silas dropped through the hidden opening, the satchel clutched tight against his chest. The cellar was dark, cramped, and led to an old mine shaft the previous owner had dug looking for silver. It connected to a natural cave that opened onto the hillside behind his property. But as Silas crawled through the narrow tunnel, he heard something that made his heart sink. Ezekiel's rifle had gone silent. Silas crawled through the narrow tunnel, his elbows scraping against the rough stone walls. Behind him, he could hear Brennan cursing, as he discovered the loose floorboard. The man's voice echoed down into the cellar, but by then Silas was already 50 feet away, moving through the old mine shaft. The tunnel angled upward, following a vein of quartz that glittered in the dim light filtering from above. Previous owner Pete Morrison had been convinced there was silver in these hills. He'd been wrong about silver, but right about one thing. These tunnels were the perfect place to hide. Silas emerged from the cave opening on the hillside, gasping in the clean desert air. From his position, he could see his ranch spread out below. Dalton's men were swarming through his house like ants, tearing apart everything he'd built over 3 years. But Ezekiel was still alive. The old man was sitting against the water trough, hands tied behind his back, but very much breathing. Vickery stood guard over him while the others searched the house. Smart move. Keep the neighbor alive as leverage in case Ward tried to run. Silas checked the satchel. Eleanor's letter was still there, along with the property deed and marriage certificate. Hard evidence that Marcus Dalton had murdered a wealthy widow for gold that was rightfully hers. Evidence that could hang him. But first, Silas had to survive long enough to get it to the sheriff. He worked his way along the hillside, staying low among the rocks and scrub brush. His horse was still in the corral, but getting to it meant crossing open ground where Vickery could see him. He needed a distraction. That's when he remembered Pete Morrison's other secret, the one the old drunk had babbled about during his last night in the saloon before disappearing. Pete hadn't just been digging for silver. He'd been hiding something else in these hills. Something that had made him rich enough to buy passage to California. Silas had thought it was just drunk talk, but now he wondered, what if Pete had found Eleanor's gold before she died? What if there was more treasure hidden in these hills than just what lay scattered around that oak tree? He followed a game trail along the ridge, moving toward the old stamp mill that Pete had built and abandoned. If there was more gold hidden up here, Pete would have stashed it somewhere safe, somewhere only he knew about. The mill came into view. A ramshackle building clinging to the mountainside like a wooden tick. Most of the machinery had been removed, but the building itself remained, slowly rotting under the desert sun. Silas approached carefully, scanning for any sign that Dalton's men had been here before him. The dust around the entrance was undisturbed, marked only by lizard tracks and the occasional print of a desert fox. Inside the mill, everything looked exactly as Pete had left it. Old tools, broken equipment, and in the corner, a heavy wooden chest that Silas had never noticed before. He pried open the lid with a crowbar, and what he found inside changed everything he thought he knew about Eleanor Whitmore's murder. Silas crawled through the narrow tunnel, his elbows scraping against the rough stone walls. Behind him, he could hear Brennan cursing as he discovered the loose floorboard. The man's voice echoed down into the cellar, but by then Silas was already 50 feet away, moving through the old mine shaft. The tunnel angled upward, following a vein of quartz that glittered in the dim light filtering from above. Previous owner Pete Morrison had been convinced there was silver in these hills. He'd been wrong about silver, but right about one thing. These tunnels were the perfect place to hide. Silas emerged from the cave opening on the hillside, gasping in the clean desert air. From his position, he could see his ranch spread out below. Dalton's men were swarming through his house like ants, tearing apart everything he'd built over 3 years. But Ezekiel was still alive. The old man was sitting against the water trough, hands tied behind his back, but very much breathing. Vickery stood guard over him while the others searched the house. Smart move? Keep the neighbor alive as leverage in case Ward tried to run. Silas checked the satchel. Eleanor's letter was still there, along with the property deed and marriage certificate. Hard evidence that Marcus Dalton had murdered a wealthy widow for gold that was rightfully hers. Evidence that could hang him. But first, Silas had to survive long enough to get it to the sheriff. He worked his way along the hillside, staying low among the rocks and scrub brush. His horse was still in the corral, but getting to it meant crossing open ground where Vickery could see him. He needed a distraction. That's when he remembered Pete Morrison's other secret, the one the old drunk had babbled about during his last night in the saloon before disappearing. Pete hadn't just been digging for silver. He'd been hiding something else in these hills. Something that had made him rich enough to buy passage to California. Silas had thought it was just drunk talk, but now he wondered, what if Pete had found Eleanor's gold before she died? What if there was more treasure hidden in these hills than just what lay scattered around that oak tree? He followed a game trail along the ridge, moving toward the old stamp mill that Pete had built and abandoned. If there was more gold hidden up here, Pete would have stashed it somewhere safe, somewhere only he knew about. The mill came into view. a ramshackle building clinging to the mountainside like a wooden tick. Most of the machinery had been removed, but the building itself remained, slowly rotting under the desert sun. Silas approached carefully, scanning for any sign that Dalton's men had been here before him. The dust around the entrance was undisturbed, marked only by lizard tracks and the occasional print of a desert fox. Inside the mill, everything looked exactly as Pete had left it. Old tools, broken equipment, and in the corner, a heavy wooden chest that Silas had never noticed before. He pried open the lid with a crowbar, and what he found inside changed everything he thought he knew about Eleanor Whitmore's murder. Inside the wooden chest, Silas found Pete Morrison's journal and 3 more satchels of gold coins. But it was Pete's handwritten confession that made Silas's hands tremble as he read. "I saw Marcus Dalton kill Eleanor Whitmore," the first entry read. "Shot her down in cold blood when she refused to tell him where she'd hidden her gold. I was too much of a coward to stop him, too scared to report it. But I took her body and buried it proper under the oak tree on my land, along with some of her belongings. May God forgive me for my silence." The entries continued for months, detailing Pete's guilt and his discovery of Eleanor's hidden treasures scattered throughout the hills. She'd been smarter than Dalton realized, splitting her fortune across multiple hiding spots so no single person could find it all. "Dalton thinks I left for California," Pete's final entry read. "Truth is, I'm dying of the lung sickness, coughing up blood daily now. If anyone finds this journal, know that Marcus Dalton is a murderer, and Eleanor Whitmore deserves justice. I've marked all her hiding spots on the map inside this chest. There's enough gold here to see Dalton hang and make someone rich besides." Silas found the map, hand-drawn on leather, showing 6 different locations throughout the hills. Pete had recovered Eleanor's entire fortune and hidden it in his old mill, waiting for someone brave enough to use it against Dalton. Now Silas understood why Pete had sold the ranch so cheap and disappeared. The man was dying and desperate to clear his conscience, but too afraid of Dalton's revenge to act while he lived. Silas stuffed Pete's journal and the map into the satchel with Eleanor's letter. 3 pieces of evidence that would hang Marcus Dalton and see justice done for a woman who'd been dead 5 years. But first, he had to save Ezekiel and survive long enough to get this evidence to the sheriff. He could hear voices echoing up from the valley below. Dalton's men spreading out, searching the hills for him. They'd found his escape tunnel and were tracking him methodically, using their superior numbers to close off every possible route down the mountain. Silas looked at the gold stacked in Pete's chest. Enough wealth to buy his way out of this mess, to disappear like Pete had tried to do. He could take the treasure and run, leave Ezekiel to whatever fate Dalton had planned. But Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. "I pray someone will see justice done." And Pete's confession haunted him. "May God forgive me for my silence." Silas Ward had never been the bravest man in the territory, but he wouldn't repeat Pete Morrison's mistake. He wouldn't let fear turn him into a coward who looked the other way while evil prospered. He gathered up all the evidence, every scrap of paper that could convict Dalton, and headed back down the mountain. It was time to end this, one way or another. Silas descended the mountain with a plan that would either save Ezekiel or get them both killed. He worked his way back toward the ranch, but instead of approaching directly, he circled wide to the old creek bed that ran behind his property. The creek was dry this time of year, but its banks provided perfect cover. From there, he could see Vickery still guarding Ezekiel by the water trough. Dalton sat on Silas's front porch, his wounded shoulder bandaged, but his gun hand steady. Brennan and Hartley were somewhere up in the hills, still searching. Silas pulled Pete's journal from the satchel and tore out several pages. He wrapped them around rocks and prepared to throw them where Dalton's men would find them, but not the complete evidence, just enough to make them fight each other. The first page he threw landed near the corral. It contained Pete's description of Eleanor's treasure locations, but with one crucial detail, a lie Silas had added in Pete's handwriting style. It claimed that Dalton had already found and hidden half the gold for himself, planning to cheat his partners. He threw the second page near the water trough, close enough for Vickery to find. This one detailed how Dalton had killed Eleanor in front of witnesses, making him a liability to anyone working with him. Then, Silas waited. Vickery found the first page within minutes. Silas watched the outlaw's face change as he read about Dalton's supposed betrayal. When Brennan and Hartley returned from the hills, Vickery showed them the evidence. The confrontation erupted exactly as Silas hoped. "You lying snake!" Hartley shouted at Dalton. "You've been planning to cheat us all along." "That's not mine," Dalton protested, but his men were already drawing their guns. The gunfight lasted 30 seconds. When the smoke cleared, Dalton lay dead on the porch. Vickery was gut-shot and dying, and Brennan had a bullet through his leg. Only Hartley remained uninjured, but he was too busy tending his wounded partner to notice Silas approaching through the creek bed. Silas emerged behind the water trough, his shotgun trained on Hartley. "Drop the gun and untie my neighbor." Hartley looked at the weapon pointed at his chest and carefully placed his pistol on the ground. His hands shook as he cut Ezekiel's bonds. "You planned this," Hartley said, his voice filled with grudging respect. "Turned us against each other. Sometimes bad men don't need much help destroying themselves," Silas replied. An hour later, Sheriff Coleman arrived with a posse, summoned by the sound of gunfire echoing across the desert. Silas handed over Pete Morrison's journal, Eleanor's letter, and the map showing where she'd hidden her treasure. "This is enough evidence to clear Eleanor Whitmore's name and prove she was murdered," the sheriff said after reading everything. "You did good, Ward." Ezekiel clapped Silas on the shoulder. "Rec and Pete Morrison can finally rest easy, knowing the truth came out." 3 months later, Silas used part of Eleanor's recovered gold to expand his ranch and help Ezekiel modernize his farm. The rest he donated to build a church in Tombstone, with a memorial plaque for Eleanor Whitmore, a woman who'd hidden her treasure so well that it took 5 years and 3 good men to see justice done. Marcus Dalton's grave lies in the desert outside town, unmarked and unmourned. But Eleanor Whitmore's story lived on, proving that sometimes the truth stays buried only until the right person has courage enough to dig it up. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale, where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.